Thank you very much, Professor Thompson, for that kind introduction. And I just would like quickly to express my great gratitude to the organizers of this symposium, and to particularly Professor Thompson and Gianna Mina and her staff and Jeffrey Montgomery. It's really such a privilege and an honor to be here, so thank you very much. So as a social and cultural historian, and not, I'm afraid, an art historian, I'm here to talk about the rising popularity of Mingei in the 1950s, in especially Japan. So, as we all know, thanks to the fascinating presentations earlier today, Mingei was first discovered by Yanagi Soetsu and his colleagues in the 1920s. And the Mingei movement would very successfully spread the knowledge and appreciation of Mingei to many others in Japan and even outside of Japan during the 1930s and the 1940s. But I think it's also safe to say that it really was not until after World War II, during the post-war decades, that Mingei became really popular and actually became a household word, if not quite a household item, throughout Japanese society at large. And the question I'd like to explore with you now is, how did this happen? What actually caused the various Mingei boomu, the booms, that we often hear of during the post-war decades, and especially what caused the very first one in the late 1950s. And my argument, very simply, is that an important factor in the rise of Mingei in the 1950s was its connection to something that I am calling folk modernism. So what is folk modernism? If this sounds unfamiliar to you, don't worry. It's actually a term that I made up, but I made it up, I think, for a good reason. This refers to a visual aesthetic style that was developed in the 1950s to promote Japanese export goods and Japan itself in the West. But very quickly, after that, folk modernism gained real visibility and traction in the domestic context as well within Japan. So what I'd like to do for the rest of my presentation, and I'll try to stay on time, is briefly discuss what I mean by folk modernism and the place of Mingei within folk modernism as a style developed for export to North America and Western Europe. And then I will talk at somewhat greater length about my current research, which deals with folk modernism in relation to Mingei in Japan during the 1950s. So folk modernism, of course, is not a term that anybody actually used in the 1950s. The people who were most involved in developing this style had their own terms for it. And by these people, I mean Japanese industrial designers and officials who were affiliated with something called the Kogei Shidojo, the Industrial Arts Institute, within the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MITI. So their terms were things like Nihoncho, so Japanesque is how I'm translating that. Japanese modern, Japanese modern, sometimes Nihon modern. And then sometimes in the 1950s, people began to criticize it in terms of Japonica or Japonica. And as you can tell, there's a slightly critical edge to that term. So I think, however, that folk modern is a helpful term, unlike some of these, because it actually emphasizes the important role played in this style by Mingei, which Yanagi himself translated in English as folk craft, or we might call it folk art. Now, I could talk about folk modernism for export at great length, but I need to keep it short. So I will just show you one example to illustrate what I mean by it, and also to show you the place of Mingei in it. Okay, so this is a photograph of the Japanese pavilion, a Japanese model room that was created in 1955 by MITI, the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, for an international exposition in Sweden. This exposition was called H55 for short. It was a very high-profile exposition held in Helsingborg, Sweden, and devoted to architecture, industrial design, and home furnishings. And Japan was one of only 10 countries that was specifically invited to participate. And they were invited to participate by submitting pavilions or model rooms. And in fact, the reason why Japan was invited to participate was because it had already shown several other model rooms in the early 1950s in this Nihoncho, or folk modern style, and they had been extremely successful. So this is a photo of the Japanese pavilion, which was designed and created by the Industrial Art Institute, and in particular, the lead designer was Kenmochi Isamu, who was really a key figure, probably the key figure in the development of folk modernism. And as I've noted there, the architectural consultant was, of course, the very well-known architect Tandie Kenzo. And what I just want to point out here is the way in which Mingei is literally foregrounded in this photograph. So you see here that right in front we have a nice little array of Mingei objects. And I'm not just calling them Mingei because I think they're Mingei. They were actually procured from the Mingei shop Takumi in Tokyo. So there was a very conscious collaboration going on here. More generally, this is a very sleek vision of an imaginary Japanese home. I think it's safe to say that almost nobody actually lived like this in Japan. A Japanese interior that integrates the modern and the native in ways that were informed by Mingei ideology and the Mingei aesthetic. So just to quickly point out a few things, these lighting here, these lights, I don't know if anybody recognizes them. They are akari, which were paper lanterns, or chochin, which had been reinterpreted in the early 1950s by the Japanese-American sculptor Isamu Noguchi. And Noguchi, by the way, was another important figure in the development of this kind of, in some ways, transatlantic or trans-Pacific style. Also, you see here the use of unpainted wood and of other distinctively vernacular Japanese materials, such as bamboo matting on the floor, paper with the backlit shoji screens, woven straw mats or tatami, which are being used not only on the floor here, but also on this tabletop, kind of an unconventional use for tatami at that time, as well as a hand-woven carpet from kurashiki, which had also been procured from Takumi. And if you can see right here in the very back, there is a tea set, which was designed by the industrial designer Yanagi Sori, the eldest son of Yanagi Soetsu.